Yeah, the founding feathers, the true ancestry of domestic Barbary Dove. Lots of people have even not heard of a Barbary Dove, but it is a domesticated species. It's also known as the ring dove or the ringneck dove, especially in America they call it the ringneck dove or the collared dove. The scientific name given by Linnaeus, based on a domesticated bird, he called it Columba rissoria, from the Latin risoris, that means laughing. And people who do know the species, they have a laughing sound indeed. And the interesting thing is, although in England it's called Barbary Dove, in many other countries, European countries, it's all names related to the laughing sound. So in Dutch we call it a lachduif, a laughing dove. The German do the same, lachtaube, a laughing dove. And the French do the same, Turtur, the laughing turtle dove. As I said, the English call it the Barbary Dove. By the way, laughing dove has nothing to do with that species, Streptopelia sinagalensis. But interestingly enough, it doesn't laugh at all, and it doesn't have any sound that makes a laughing sound. So why the laughing dove is called laughing dove, that's a different thing. Right. Linnaeus described it, I won't do the Latin by the way, but I have translated it. Linnaeus described the species as the dove with the yellowish upper parts and the black neck ring. Oh, that's pretty good. Black neck ring, yellowish upper parts. Also he said habitat in India, and it is also our common turtle dove, but he probably will refer to the fact that they were commonly kept in captivity. But habitat in India, where did he get that from? Well, he got that probably from Aldrovandi, who called the species Turtur indicus. Funny enough, he doesn't mention India as being the land of origin. Yes, he called it the Orient, but why did he call the species then Turtur of Orientis or Orientalis? Who knows? According to Aldrovandi, they came from India. After Aldrovandi, we got Wilbury. He called it the Indian turtle dove. Simple following Aldrovandi. You can see that, in fact, the two drawings are exactly the same. So Wilbury simple copied it from Aldrovandi and called it the Indian turtle dove, common in captivity in England. That's correct. And then there was Albin. He didn't give it a scientific name, but called it the turtle dove from the East Indies. But in fact, we didn't know where it came from. That probably also refers to the name, because we didn't know where the dove came from. We call it Barbary Dove. Just as Barbary duck, for a long time people didn't know where the Barbary duck came from. So by calling it Barbary, it comes from a foreign country. You can't go wrong there. So yeah, country origin unknown. Then there was Selby, and he was on the right way. So it's domesticated, correct, it is a domesticated species. It's found in various parts of Africa, he is correct in that way. But then he described the species, and if you really look at the description, you think, oh, that was the Cape turtle dove. So he had the wrong species in mind, but the fact that he thought that the domesticated form came from an African species, he was pretty good on that. Having said that, my own countryman, Temminck, had already suggested it earlier in 1808. He suspected that the wild form came from Africa. And as you might have noticed in all those pictures, they're all very pale colored brown and not the really dark color from the wild species. So yeah, Temminck also knew the Barbary Dove, in Dutch called lachduif, and in French, because Temminck was very fond of French, Turtur. He had a few in his collection as well. He also described the white one. He gave it a different name, as in those days, Columba alba. But nevertheless, he wrote, it's a variety of Columba rissoria. So in other words, the white ones also came from Africa, in his opinion. Well, one of the problems was only the pale one, the yellowish brown one as Linnaeus described it, and the white ones were present in captivity. So people constantly try to find a wild species, but none of them really agreed with the color for what we know, what we had in our cages at home. Because I said only the pale ones and the white ones, and by the way it's not white, it still vaguely has this neck ring here, but most people call it white. Obviously, in the start from domestication, people like novelties, so at some point probably when they start keeping them, breeding them, color mutations, like those two popped up, people start keeping those, breeding with those, and purely because of how the inheritance works, the wild color simply disappeared from captivity. So for hundreds of years, the original dark wild color of the species was simply not present in captivity, and that is one of the reasons probably that there was so much confusion about what is the wild species. Right, I constantly call it Barbary Dove, Streptopelia risoria. Sunderval described the wild species as Roseo grisea, and many people still use that name, but in fact it is a junior synonym, but many people don't want to accept that. But Shelley, 1883, for the first time suggested that Columba risoria from Sunderval, what was indeed the African collared dove, might be the wild species, the wild ancestor of the domesticated Barbary dove. And but even if Shelley wrote that, still lots of people thought that the Eurasian collared dove, decaocto, that was very common in India, that was the wild ancestor. And then Hartwig finally, as you probably know, Hartwig was Rothschild's curator. Hartwig came with lots of evidence that indeed the domesticated form, the Barbary dove, was the domesticated form of the African collared dove, Columba grisea. And so he gave all sorts of evidence and then said finally we can conclude that the Indian species, so the Eurasian collared dove, cannot be the ancestor of the tame dove, while in all probabilities Streptopelia grisea is the species from which our domestic birds have come from. And he was bloody well right. But still at that point lots of people didn't really know it or didn't realize it. And when I was 10 years old, I think I was just 11 there, my first dove was an Eurasian collared dove. I picked up from the street, a little squab falling out of the nest, hand reared, lovely bird, turned out to be a hen. And then in the pet shop, oh, they sell them as well. At that point I didn't know the difference between Eurasian collared doves and Barbary doves. So I convinced my parents that I was allowed to buy a male for my female. And at that point, just a new mutation, the pied ones, came up. But they were far too expensive for my pocket money. So, well, I had saved up. I couldn't afford a pied one, but I thought to be clever, because as you can see, my bird, okay, the Eurasian collared dove was a wild collared one. I thought, I'm clever. I get myself a white cockbird and a white one with a brown one. Nah, that must result in pied youngsters. That can't, I mean, that must be. Well, it was a bit of a disappointment, because I bred lots of those, and I bred lots of those, but no pied ones. For the simple reason, pied is a completely different mutation. And second of all, it turned out that was my first introduction to genetics, and my first introduction even to sex linkage, that mutation is sex-linked. So in this case, if you pair a white cockbird to a non-white hen, you get only white females, and you get only dark-colored cockbirds. Because at the end of the year, I had a handful of white ones, a handful of brown ones. I was indeed surprised that all the brown ones were males, and all the white ones were females. So yeah, again, that was my first introduction to genetics, and that's how it, 11 years old, that's how all this started. And yeah, well, I might not have realized that Barbary Dove and Eurasian Collared Dove is not the same. They do hybridize very well, as we will see further on, and they're all fertile as well. Anyway, but apart from some people not realizing it, or simply don't believe it, and I mean, the Lacour, he, I don't know if you can read it, those two pictures, left and below, views of the Indian ring dove, Streptopelia decaocto, domestic pied variety. Sorry, decaocto is not the Barbary Dove. So the Lacour had it wrong. Our friend Edward Dickinson in Howard the Moor 4 still suggests that it had to be proven that the African collared dove, Roseau is the wild ancestor of Risoria. Well, so at some point I thought we have to prove it then. So yeah, African collared dove, formerly known as Streptopelia roseau. This is a quick side turn. Sunderville had never seen a specimen. He based his description on a plate in Le Voyant, this plate, and on the description of Turtur risorius from northeast Africa mentioned by Ruppel. The doves mentioned by Ruppel were indeed African collared doves, but there was no picture or whatever, simple description of that he had seen doves in northeast Africa, and he called them Streptopelia of Turtur risoria. So on the plate, and Ruppel, he names the species, the African collared dove, as, he called it Columba, but Columba risoria, but in fact it was a mixed type series. So in between we quickly have designated a neotype, simple to avoid the conflict with Capicola, but also to have a proper type specimen for what is supposed to be Roseau, what is a junior synonym. If I say junior synonym, Thomas Donegan, I guess some people know him, he proposed to have the name Roseau preserved for the wild form, but he wanted to keep Risoria for the domesticated form. I would say, in a way, I'm pleased that the ICZN finally ruled, no, wait a minute, Roseau is a junior synonym, so we shouldn't use Roseau at all. That was not what Donegan wanted. He wanted to have it preserved for the wild form because most people used it for the wild form, while Risoria was used for the domesticated form, but in principle it's exactly the same. So the ICZN ruled the species, African collared dove, and its domesticated form should be Streptopelia risoria. Some people agreed with it, or at least accepted it and use it now. Others still don't. But yeah, I keep on using African collared dove, Streptopelia risoria, for both the wild one as the domesticated one, because it's turned out to be the same. So yeah, African collared dove, 3 subspecies until recently. Arabica from northeast Africa, the nominate, northwest and central Africa, and Bonaerensis from northern Nigeria. If you look at the photos, there's not much difference, and I can tell you, you cannot really tell the difference between them. And if you then read the original descriptions, for example, Arabica is slightly dark and has a little bit more grey in certain parts. You think, well, yes, I can find a few who have that, but I can also find a few who don't. And if you go to the other subspecies, well, all the characteristics from so-called Arabica you can find in the other subspecies as well. So altogether, it's all very vague. Some people know how I feel about subspecies anyway. Bonaerensis was already kicked out very quickly. So in most books you won't even find anymore the subspecies Bonaerensis. But in most works, it's still divided in Arabica and the nominate Risoria. However, with DNA, we have now shown there's nothing different about them. They're all the same. We also took a few samples from what was supposed to be Bonaerensis. That was also all the same. So in principle, African collared dove is monotypic, and the junior synonym is Roseau. So I had hoped there were more people, then I would reach more people by saying, promise me never ever use rosé or grisea anymore. Well, promise me you don't use that anymore. So yes, African collared dove. As there was always a lot of confusion between Eurasian collared dove, African collared dove, the Barbary dove. A little jump to the Eurasian collared dove was already named in 1838. I can't even pronounce the man's name, Frivaldsky. And yeah, as you can see, he based his name on birds from the Balkan, Bulgaria, but he had published it in a journal that was overlooked by everybody because, and it had a very small area, and also it was in Bulgarian language, so not many people could read it. So the name decaocto is completely overlooked for many, many, many years. It's a nice story about decaocto, by the way, because the name is based on an old legend from the Balkans, and there are two different versions. One version was that Jesus, let's start with the most common one. There was a poor maid who was very badly paid by her mistress. She thought she was very badly paid. Only 18 pieces a year. I don't know how much a piece is, might be lots of money, but anyway, only 18 pieces a year. And she prayed to the gods that she wanted the world to know how badly she was paid and how bad her mistress was. So then there was the god Zeus, and there were different stories. Zeus changed himself in a dove, or he changed the maid in a dove, or he created the dove. Long story short, there was a dove, certainly, who should pronounce all over the world 18, 18, 18. If you listen to the sound they make, coo, 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 you don't fit 18 in there. And decaocto is 4 syllabi, and so how that exactly works is not quite sure, but it is all based on the legend from the 18 pieces, and that's why the species is called decaocto. The funny thing is, the species did what it was supposed to do, spreading all over the world and announcing how badly the mate was treated, because the species has really spread all over the world and has also reached, with a bit of help, America, but more about that later. There's even a type specimen in the Naumann Museum. I'm not quite sure if they realize it's a type specimen, but yeah. Another nice thing about the Eurasian collared dove, I can't help myself when I watch television. Every program on television that is from during or before the World War II, often scenes from outside. You hear wood pigeons in the background, and everyone's often you go, coo, coo, coo. You think they were not in England yet. That is wrong. They should have cut that out. But anyway, so yeah, I can't help myself when I hear that. Right. As I said, decaocto, the name was very long overlooked, and a name that was even not officially published. It was not a proper description from Norman Nuden. Columba daurica from Hudson was used for many years. As I said, even about not a proper name really. Hudson had collected, as probably most of you know, lots of material in Nepal. Most of the material came to the museum, not the best skins, but nevertheless with one of the very earliest collections from Nepal. They all had a number on their neck or on their leg. That number refers to a plate. So Hudson had also commissioned people, probably local artists. Every species he collected and had in his collection, he had a painting of. Sometimes it's not completely clear because sometimes they have different numbers by different species, but then it turned out, for example, it was a juvenile of a certain species and an adult. Did he know that, or that he thought it was something else? So lots unknown about Hudson's collection, but it's known that he used the name daurica for the species. Gray published that in his list from the collection from Hudson, and the name was used for many, many, many years. even lots of people who didn't know that decaocto was already named decaocto start naming lots of different subspecies. I've mentioned them here, but none of those subspecies nowadays are considered to be subspecies of Eurasian Collared Dove, except for one, Xanthocyclus. Xantho from yellow, cyclus from ring, so the species has a very bright yellow eye ring. Only occurs in Myanmar, Burma, and interesting thing is that the cooing sound is very much the same as Eurasian Collared Dove. As you might have noticed, Eurasian Collared Dove, when they fly, when they're excited, they have a very raw scream. Anyway, they vocalize during flight. There's no pigeon who vocalizes during flight, only the Eurasian Collared Dove. And this one. Eurasian Collared Dove has a 3-syllable call, but very rarely a 2-syllable. This one has a 2-syllable call and very rarely a 3. But again, you can't really tell the difference between them. They are slightly darker. They have that very typical yellow eye ring. Some people even before DNA already said, oh, that's a distinct species, that's no subspecies. Well, I won't deny it, but let's see. So yes, with molecular work we have indeed shown that they are so different from decaocto that there should be a distinct species. And although they are still as least concern, so they're not threatened yet, the problem with this is they're isolated in Burma, but if for whatever reason proper Eurasian Collared Dove will ever turn up there, they probably will wipe them out, as they have done with other populations of related species as well. So really, if this is now a distinct species, there should be a bit more protection. And the interesting thing is there was no type specimen. It was described from a living bird in the zoo in 1906 by Newman. And Newman said, if it dies, don't throw it away, it's the type. Well, it did die, and it was thrown away because according to the bird keepers there, it was terribly eaten by rats. So okay, so the bird was described from a live bird, there's no type specimen, seeing that the species easily can come under threat if something happens. So we have designated a neotype for it. Right, that's enough about Burmese Collared Dove. Eurasian Collared Dove is monotypic. And although, and they have a big area from Europe, they have now reached North Africa, they're all the way in the south, they're in India, South India, they're in China, they're up into Russia. The interesting thing is they're different in size, different in color, but it has all to do with Bergman rules and all. From when you go warm and more humid, you get smaller and darker. For example, the birds from Ceylon are really small and dark, but genetically still exactly the same as the ones from Europe. This is a Dutch bird. So yeah, Eurasian Collared Dove. If you remember the African Collared Dove wild, you can see that people got a bit confused because they look very much the same. Having said that, they look very much the same. Certainly if you see them separately, oh, there's an Eurasian Collared Dove. Oh, as soon as you put them together, there is quite a difference. African Collared Dove is a lot smaller. Is almost white underneath, while the Eurasian Collared Dove is grey. Again, the size doesn't help if you see only one. What might help is the undertail covers. And Eurasian Collared Dove has that typical spike here, while it is completely white in African Collared Dove. The covers are grey, the belly is grey, and in African Collared Dove it is white. Well, finally, the founding feathers. So where does the African Collared Dove then, where does the Barbary Dove really come from? Well, DNA has shown when we used old samples, so there's all museum specimens from 100 till 200 years ago. We got a few samples also from Australia, feral population. Australia had never ever any Eurasian Collared Dove, so to make sure that we had proper Barbary Dove samples. Very interestingly, as expected, African Collared Dove is the main ancestor for Barbary Dove. although we said Arabica and the nominus Rizoria are genetically the same. I don't know enough about DNA, ask me to know the difference, but you could tell the difference between the populations from Arabia and the populations from Africa. It turned out that all those Barbary doves, the tame ones, came from the Arabian population. In itself not really strange, because it's more likely that things got domesticated in Arabia than they got domesticated in Africa. But more interesting, they all had a tiny bit of Eurasian Collared Dove in them. All of those, from 100, 200 years ago. Where did that come from? Because Eurasian Collared Dove was not in Europe before the 1950s. Well, really interesting. In fact, because we had also tested the Arabian population, all tested African Collared Doves from Arabia with a tiny bit of Eurasian Collared Dove blood in them. The populations do meet there, we don't know for how long, but the populations do meet in Arabia. And clearly, because it's both the natural habitat, there must have been some hybridization, but there is not constant hybridization going on, probably because they're both in their natural habitat. But the Eurasian Collared Dove genes in the original domesticated Barbary Dove came via his wild ancestor, because of decaocto genes were already present in the African Collared Dove and went in that way into the historic Barbary Dove. The modern ones, not really surprising, have quite a lot of Eurasian Collared Dove genes in them. First of all, as I said, in the 1900s, it was 1955 for England, 1949 for the Netherlands. Germany was a lot earlier. Eurasian Collared Dove starts spreading from the east, from Turkey. That's why lots of European countries call Eurasian Collared Dove the Turkish Collared Dove, because they came via Turkey into Europe. Whether people knew, whether people didn't know, but as soon as they came available, people might have crossed them with their Barbary Doves, because nowadays almost every Barbary Dove has some more or less genes from decaocto in it. Also interesting, we got the wild color in the Barbary Dove back via the Eurasian Collared Dove. So in principle you can say Barbary Doves nowadays are hybrids. Well, how far do you have to go for a hybrid? How much percentage of, the interesting thing is, even two birds who you think 100% Barbary Dove, ever so often you get birds look a bit grey, with a greyish, it doesn't have the spikes, but ever so often in your Barbary Dove something pops out that looks a bit like an Eurasian Collared Dove. And I would say this is then even from stock, what is not particularly selected for anything or for show, but even sometimes out of show birds. This is a bird that has 3 different mutations in it. It's really highly inbred as being in Barbary Dove for the show, and nevertheless pops out with a grey undertail cover. So that bird also has somewhere in his ancestors Eurasian Collared Dove. And that's only in captivity. But yeah, in principle we can say, despite the few little bits of DNA of decaocto, the modern Barbary Dove still, its wild ancestor is the African Collared Dove. But as I said, that is all in captivity. The interesting thing is, if the two species meet each other in areas where they originally don't come from. The Canary Islands, for example, had for a long time a feral population of Barbary Doves. That are the pale colored ones, because it was the only mutation that was available for a long time. When in the 1980s Eurasian Collared Dove arrived there, you can say is it a natural way, but anyway, Eurasian Collared Dove came there. In no time, the Barbary Doves more or less get pushed out, outcompeted, because as you could have seen, Eurasian Collared Dove is bigger, is stronger, is more aggressive, And this is hybridise, with the result that on the Canary Islands, lots of birds, okay, they have the spikes, but they're white. They have the spikes, but it's white. And this is the same, it has the spikes, but it is white. There are many hybrids on the Canary. So in fact, the population of the Canary Islands is a mixed population. And even more clear, because as I said that the pale colored Barbary Dove is a color mutation. Well, that color mutation constantly pops up as well. This is in British Columbia, but look, there's the pale one. They're both Eurasian Collared Doves. Look, it's grey underneath. In America, but also on the Canary Islands, I think the next one is the Canary Islands, yes. The percentage of color aberrant Eurasian Collared Doves is unrealistic high. Simple because of the fact they start hybridizing with Barbary Doves first, and those mutant genes, I would say, are still present in the population. And but it's the same in America, North America. The first birds from North America came from the Bahamas. In fact, the first bird came from the Netherlands. Not from me, but there was a breeder of ringneck doves, Barbary Doves in the Bahamas, who wanted to have wild-colored ones. For whatever reason, he got Eurasian Collared Doves out of the Netherlands. In those days, you could still easily import birds. He starts crossing them with his Barbary Doves. A few escaped, then he was fed up with him. He released the rest. There might have been pure ones among them, but certainly lots of hybrids. In no time, the Bahamas were overflooded with them, so they make the jump to Florida. There was a feral population of Barbary Doves. They happily hybridized, more or less wiping out the Barbary Doves, and the Eurasian Collared Dove kept them spreading all the way up north, also south. They are now in South America as well, with the result that are constantly those color mutations. Most people call them leucistic. They are not. Never ever used the word leucistic. But so yeah, America and the Canaries probably at some point will have a population of doves that is neither one or the other. But it might be evolution, who knows? I mean, certain things we simply can't avoid anymore, real human influence. But so yeah. Last little thing. Now we know that the Barbary Dove comes from the African Collared Dove. He has the wild color back, but the wild color is in principle came from the Eurasian Collared Dove. But as we saw earlier, it's exactly the same color really as the real African Collared Dove. This was the first mutation. I've only put 4 mutations here because I couldn't fit more, but there are about 15 different mutations nowadays. That is the oldest one. Both pigments have a bit bleached, so you get a paler bird. This one, for example, only one pigment has bleached. That means that the reddish brown gets more prominent. This is leucism. You're allowed to call this leucism, a pied bird. And this is a bird that lost all its brown pigment. So every other reddish brown that is here is gone here, so it's a grey bird. And the interesting thing is, if you breed, of course you can combine things with each other. And but again, I couldn't fit much on it. But, for example, this mutation combined with this mutation gives this. And it's not simple crossing them and you get them out straight away, no, because the problem is if you cross this with this, you get this one again. And if you don't do those together, then a certain percentage will be this. Doing this one with a pied one, you get those. This one with a pied one, you get this. This one with the grey one, you get this. And you can even do this one and that one, and you get that. And there are about 200 more combinations possible. To be fair, they all get more and more white, so at some point you think, well, what is the point? But nevertheless, for people who are interested in genetics, it's the most ideal species in my opinion. 14 days, 2 weeks sitting on the eggs, 2 weeks later they fledge, so after 2 weeks you know what color they have. A week later they have eggs again, so yeah, they are almost as rapid as mice. And well, it's my favorite species. Yeah, that is, I guess, all about it. So Barbary Dove comes from African Collared Dove. Despite a few genes from decaocto in it. That's in principle the same with chickens. We still agree that chicken comes all from red jungle fowl, although there's a tiny little bit of another species in it. But a few genes from a few hundred years ago do not really count as certainly being a hybrid or having two ancestors instead of one ancestor. So yeah, Barbary Dove comes African Collared Dove. And that is probably it. Any questions?
Well, so firstly, just to say that was a lovely talk and it was really interesting, genuinely. And I think we're so lucky to live in an age where we have genetics available to help us unravel some of these quite thorny conundrums. So I've got one question. I think I've always admired the way that you have ploughed this fantastically fertile field of interesting stories relating to hybridization and colour mutations. So, having sorted this out, what is the next great white whale to go after in terms of?
As you said, Will Smith had been here about rock doves, but he only has looked at the European or the English ones really, and decided, quite rightly probably, that the ones on Shetland Islands are the most pure ones, so no feral pigeon blood in them. Already for years with colleagues in Copenhagen we look at rock doves worldwide, and we have already published a few things. There is more to come, there will be something in the bulletin. One of the interesting things is that one of the subspecies, if you look at it, are so different, but always considered a subspecies. It's not a subspecies, it's a distinct species, and might have been already extinct as well, so it might be too late. But another thing is that all the subspecies in India, they look like the same. So it might be finally even, perhaps that there is one subspecies in Africa left, but it might even be that Columbalivia will be monotypic as well at some point. Well, now I think there are still 6 or 7 subspecies recognized. So yeah, that is the next step. And because many populations are simple feral populations, but they have been isolated for so long time that they're all uniform, and then people thought, oh, that's not feral, that's something new. No, most populations are affected by feral pigeons. Is that a problem? I don't know. I mean, it's a different discussion. I'm not starting the discussion here, but simple. With wild cats, people get all paranoid if domesticated cats hybridize with them, but genetically they are still the same species. You might call it a different subspecies, but does it matter? Does it not matter? I don't know. If it is a wild cat, I don't say they're cuddly, but they look cuddly, then people get obsessed about it. With rock doves, probably Will Smith said the same. Nobody's interested in rock doves. It's the same with the duck, with the mallard. I mean, if you see the color mutations in mallards, that all comes from domesticated ducks. Nobody's worried about the original wild mallard. Do they still exist? I have no idea. But, so yeah, I guess I keep on working on pigeons, and the next one is the rock dove indeed.
I think it's so interesting that you can trace back even just the cultural influences of different areas, especially for the Middle East, in terms of the importance of the history of aviculture there, and it comes out so clearly in modern genetics. Right, any questions?
I'm on the Eurasian bird atlas, and we have in Arabia as an area of the 2 species without advantage. Collared dove's only been in Arabia since '63. I've noticed that where the 2 species meet, the male collared doves, they sing differently.
Okay.
Now, is that a result of hybridisation, or what is it? Why is that?
It's very much possible, because in the past, as I've shown first, unconsciously, but I have also on purpose crossed them to see how things work. And also interesting, you can do the same species cross, so Barbary Dove with Eurasian Collared Dove, but depending on who was the father, who was the mother, the offspring looks different, the offspring makes a different noise. But in one way or another, the Eurasian Collared Dove almost dominate in everything. But hybrids definitely have a different cooing sound, and also the excitement call they have is completely different from either of those. So yeah, if you say there is a hybrid zone and they coo different, that's probably indeed because there are hybrids. But the interesting thing is that compared with the Canary Islands or North America, both populations didn't exist next to each other. Eurasian Collared Dove took over, and the Barbary Doves are gone in those periods. There are lots of hybrids still around, or birds with hybrid characteristics, but pure Barbary Doves are almost completely gone from those areas, while they naturally occur in Arabia. It seems that they hold their population, okay, there is a hybrid zone in the middle, but Eurasian Collared Dove is not wiping out the African Collared Dove.
Actually, it's a bit artificial because in the northern part of the range, the African Collared Dove is migratory. So it only means the collared
Okay, yeah.
dove, in the spring and summer.
Yeah.
And so I'm very curious as to what's actually happening. You don't seem to hear many African collared doves singing in a strange way.
Okay. Yeah, again, almost everything in the Eurasian Collared Dove is dominant, so a hybrid sings, coos, whatever you call it, in a stranger way. So all the African Collared Doves you hear are probably pure ones, and because even the second generation back to an African Collared Dove still has a few funny things in it, and then the third generation you can't really tell anymore, apart from that. So now and then, especially with the tail and the undertail covers, but then of course you have to be close, you have to look underneath them. But yeah, but apart from those doves, and again, in Arabia it's natural habitat, but hybridization nowadays, and not nowadays, it always happens, but now with DNA, we have discovered now so many things. I mean, we know that, for example, blue tit and azure tit does hybridize. And there were even named distinct species in the past because they were quite common. People didn't know anything about hybridizing, so that was a species. Now we know it's a hybrid. Recently we have done some DNA. It turned out that almost every blue tit has a bit of azure tit genes in them, and the other way around, although they look like pure. So hybridization, Capercaillie and black grouse, they hybridize happily, and the offspring is fertile, and they happily go back to one and the other. Even birds of paradise, we think we've always learned with biology here, they're all developed in their own way, so that avoids hybridization. Well, the most extreme things are birds of paradise, and they hybridize, and some of them are even fertile, and we have found with DNA birds who are the second generation that you think, well, all the things we have learned from biology in the past is out of the window, and we have to realize that hybridization is far more common than we think it is. So perhaps you should even think about the whole species concept. What is a species nowadays?
Sorry,
yeah.
Question, but how do you think that hybridization affects the migratory strategy of the African?
No idea.
Hybrids will stay where they're bred, or?
Let's say it in the other way, but what was especially visible in North America when they came from the Bahamas into Florida. Both the Eurasian Collared Doves, as far as they were pure, and the hybrids kept on spreading while the Barbary Doves stay put. So for the Eurasian Collared Dove wasn't really migration, but they absolutely have the urge to take over the world because they were told to do so by Zeus. But so whether it affects the migration of, I have no idea, to be honest. Migration in itself is an interesting point because certain species nowadays, when we were young lads, we knew they would migrate, and nowadays certain species stay put where they are. Is that climate change? Is that genetics? Is that who knows? Another thing we're going to look into, speaking of migration, is the European of the turtle dove. Many different subspecies. Are there different subspecies? Some stay in Africa and breed there, while the so-called European ones come to Africa during the winter and then go back to Europe. That's a bit of a waste of time if you clearly can also breed in Africa. So are they different? Are they genetically different? Why do they migrate? Why do the others not migrate? Migration in itself is an interesting subject, but I don't know enough about it.